He woke up at 4 a.m. again. Not because of an alarm but because of the cold. It crawled through the cracks in the wall like a thief, biting his skin, whispering, "Another day, Andrew. Another fight." His mattress was thin and the blanket barely covered him. The room smelled of dust, metal, and tired dreams. 3 other guys snored nearby, wrapped in whatever clothes they had left. This was home, the workers' dorm behind the factory. He sat up slowly. His joints ached like old machinery. He rubbed his hands together, blew into them for warmth, and looked out the small, cracked window. The world outside was dark, a lifeless gray before sunrise. He could already hear the distant hum of the machines calling him back. He didn't have breakfast. He hadn't had breakfast in weeks. Just a cup of bitter instant coffee he'd stretched for 3 mornings straight. His stomach growled, but he didn't care anymore. Hunger was part of life now, like the sound of metal or the smell of oil. When he stepped outside, the cold punched him in the face. The ground was covered in a thin layer of frost. His boots, old, cracked, and half the sole missing, slipped with every step. He pulled his jacket tighter. It wasn't enough, but neither was anything else. The factory stood in the distance like a sleeping giant, breathing smoke into the sky. Every time he saw it, he felt small, but not weak. He used to hate it. Now he just accepted it. The factory was both his prison and his teacher. When he walked through the gates, no one said a word. No greetings, no smiles. Just men with hollow eyes and calloused hands, clocking in and out like ghosts. The air inside was thick with steam, dust, and burnt metal. Every machine screamed louder than the last. He clocked in, tied the bandana around his mouth, and started his shift. The work was simple and brutal. Move, lift, stack, repeat. The metal parts were heavy, greasy, and sharp. His fingers were covered in tiny cuts that never healed. Sometimes, blood mixed with sweat on his palms, and he'd wrap them in old rags just to keep going. The foreman, a thick man with a cigarette always in his mouth, shouted orders without looking anyone in the eye. "Faster. You think this is a vacation?" Andrew didn't answer. No one did. Words were dangerous here, they slowed you down. By noon his shirt was soaked. His body burned, but his stomach was empty. He sat in the corner during the 10-minute break, unwrapping a stale piece of bread from a napkin. He chewed slowly, watching others laugh and smoke. They didn't look happy, just distracted. He thought about leaving sometimes. About quitting and starting fresh somewhere far away. But where would he go? He had no money. No family. No education. The factory wasn't just his job, it was the only thing between him and nothing. At 2 p.m., the foreman called him out. "You're slowing down, kid." "I'll do better," Andrew said quietly. "You said that yesterday. Don't make me replace you." Andrew nodded. He didn't argue. He turned, took a deep breath, and went back to work, harder, faster, pushing until the world blurred into sound and motion. When the siren finally rang at the end of the shift, everyone dropped their tools and disappeared. Andrew stayed behind, cleaning his area. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't leave yet. His hands were shaking. His back hurt so much he could barely stand straight. He leaned against the machine, breathing heavily. "You'll die here if you keep that up," an older worker said, walking past him. Andrew looked up. "Then at least I'll die working," he replied softly. That night, when he got back to the dorm, his roommates were already drinking. A small bottle of cheap vodka passed between them as they laughed about nothing. "Come on, Andy, drink with us," one of them said. Andrew just smiled faintly. "Not tonight." He sat on his bed and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked. The battery barely held. But it was his window to another world. A world where people built things, succeeded, became something more. He watched videos about business, motivation, self-improvement. Sometimes he didn't understand the words, but the fire, he understood that. He thought about one line he'd heard from a speaker online. "Pain doesn't mean stop. It means you're growing." He repeated it quietly to himself until he fell asleep. Pain doesn't mean stop, it means you're growing. The next morning he woke up with a strange kind of energy. Not physical strength, something else. A decision. He started carrying a small notebook in his pocket. During breaks, while others scrolled through their phones, he wrote things down. Ideas, thoughts, questions. How can I make money online? How to learn something for free? How to start when you have nothing? It became a habit. He didn't tell anyone about it. He didn't need to. Every time someone laughed at him, he just smiled and wrote another note. One evening after work, he went to the public library. He hadn't been inside one since he was a kid. The warm air hit him, and for a moment he forgot the smell of oil and rust. He sat by an old computer and started typing, How to Change Your Life When You're Broke. He read for hours. Articles, blogs, forums. He found stories of people who started small, smaller than him, and built something real. He didn't just read them. He studied them. The library closed at 9. The guard told him, "Kid, we're closing." Andrew nodded, smiled, and walked back into the cold. But this time he wasn't thinking about the factory. He was thinking about possibilities. The next few weeks became a routine of two lives. Daytime, the factory. Nighttime, the dream. He began teaching himself everything he could: basic English writing, sales, online marketing, even coding. He'd fall asleep over his notebook, wake up, and go to work again. It was a loop, but a different kind of one. Now, every repetition felt like training, not punishment. He stopped complaining even in his mind. He looked at pain like a tool. The factory didn't just break him, it built him. Every scar on his hands became a reminder. I'm not done yet. Every insult from the foreman became a challenge. Watch me. Every cold morning was another chance to rise when others stayed down. And one night, standing outside the dorm under a flickering light, he whispered to himself, I'll get out of here. Not because I hate this place, but because I'm ready for more. The stars above were dim, almost invisible through the smoke. But for the first time, Andrew believed that maybe one of them was his. It started with a choice, a small one, but it changed everything. He stopped spending money on cigarettes and cheap food. He started saving every coin, every spare cent. Not because he knew what he'd do with it, but because he knew he had to start somewhere. Each morning still began the same: the cold, the darkness, the long walk to the factory. But something was different. Now, when Andrew looked at that gray building, he didn't see a prison. He saw his past, and he was already walking out of it. He worked harder than before. Not for the foreman. Not for money. For himself. Every shift was a test. Every scar a lesson. Every drop of sweat an investment. The others noticed. Hey Andy, why you smiling at 6 in the morning? He just shrugged. They laughed, but they didn't understand. He wasn't smiling because he liked his job. He smiled because he was learning how to control his pain. When the factory siren roared, Andrew felt something inside him roar back. It wasn't rebellion. It was purpose. The kind that can't be bought or taught. The kind that's built in silence. After work, while others slept or drank, he stayed up at the old computer in the library. He started teaching himself simple online skills. Writing small ads, fixing text, translating words. He failed hundreds of times. The screen froze, the connection dropped, he got scammed twice. But he kept going. Every mistake felt like déjà vu, the same feeling he had when he first lifted those metal parts at the factory. Weak, lost, frustrated. But now he understood. Failure was just another rep in training. One evening, while scrolling through job boards, he found something small. A post asking for a few lines of product description in English. Pay $5. He almost skipped it. $5? That was nothing. But then he thought, $5 was 5 hours of work at the factory. He clicked apply. He wrote his first ad. It was simple, broken, full of grammar mistakes. But he submitted it anyway. He forgot about it until 3 days later when his phone buzzed. Payment received, $5. He stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't about the money, it was proof. Proof that he could make something beyond those walls. He walked to the window and looked at the city lights. They looked different that night, not distant but reachable. Days turned into weeks. The small jobs grew. $5 became $10. $10 became $50. It wasn't much, but it was movement. He worked through the nights, his eyes burning, his body screaming. But he didn't care. At the factory, his body broke. At home, his mind rebuilt it. The foreman noticed his energy. Kid, what's with you lately? You look half dead. Andrew smiled. I'm just learning to live. The man shook his head. You'll burn out. Andrew looked at him and said quietly, maybe. But I'll burn brighter than anyone else before I do. The winter was brutal. The pipes froze, the dorm heating failed, and some workers quit. Andrew stayed. He'd sleep in his jacket, wake up shivering, and still go to work. He didn't complain. He didn't expect comfort. Because comfort kills hunger, and hunger was his fire. He kept his notebook close, now filled with plans, ideas, numbers, sketches. A vision was forming, small, fragile, but real. He wanted to build something. A business, a life, a story that meant something. But he still didn't know how. Then one night, while watching videos about design and branding, he realized something. Every product needed words. Every brand needed a voice. And he knew what pain sounded like. He knew how to speak to broken people, because he was one of them. He started writing differently, not just ads but stories. Stories about struggle, about the climb, about the fight to survive. He posted them online one by one, not expecting anything. At first no one noticed. But then a comment appeared. Man, this hit deep. Then another. And another. People started following. His words were raw, unpolished, but they were real. And in a world full of noise, real was rare. Weeks passed. He still worked at the factory, still breathed in the smoke, still froze every morning. But his nights belonged to his dream. He started earning a few $100s a month from writing. Enough to buy a proper jacket. Enough to buy food. Enough to believe. The first time he walked into work wearing new boots, the same guy who used to laugh at him said, "Damn, Andy, you win the lottery or what?" Andrew just smiled. Something like that. But he didn't tell them. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than their noise. One day the foreman pulled him aside. "We're cutting people. You're on the list." Andrew nodded. "I understand." The man hesitated. "You're not even angry?" "No," Andrew said. "This is exactly what I needed." He packed his things that night. A few clothes. His notebook. His old cracked phone. And when he walked out of the factory gates, he didn't look back. The snow was falling again, thick and heavy. He stood there, breathing in the cold air, and whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. This is where it starts." The next months were chaos. He worked from a small rented room. No bed, no heat, just a chair and a desk. He wrote for hours, built online pages, learned how to sell, how to market, how to create. He failed more than he succeeded, but each failure felt lighter. He started getting clients from other countries, small startups, small brands. They liked his tone. "Your writing has pain in it," one client said. He smiled. "That's because it's real." And just like that, the factory boy began to disappear. He wasn't that kid anymore. He was becoming something else. Not rich, not famous, but unstoppable. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, thinking he'd overslept for work. Then he'd remember, the factory was gone. He was free. He'd sit by the window, staring at the skyline, whispering, "You made it out. But don't forget where you came from." He didn't. He never would. Because that cold factory, that pain, that emptiness, that was his foundation. He wasn't built from luck. He was built from pain. He didn't notice when the night stopped feeling cold. Or when his hands, once cracked and bleeding, turned steady and confident. All he knew was that one morning he woke up, looked at himself in the mirror, and didn't recognize the man staring back. The boy who used to drag himself to the factory was gone. The man who remained had fire in his eyes, and a plan. Andrew had built something small, but real. Clients came back. They referred friends. He wasn't rich, not yet, but he was free. For the first time in his life he could choose his hours, his work, his future. But freedom wasn't enough for him anymore. He wanted purpose. He wanted to build something that meant something. So he started a project, a small online agency. No fancy office, no investors, no team. Just him, his laptop, and a vision. He named it Forged Words. Because that's what his life felt like, forged, burned, beaten, and shaped by fire. He worked harder than ever. 12-hour days became 16. His eyes burned, his back ached, but his mind was sharper than ever. He started reading business books, listening to podcasts, studying marketing and storytelling. Every sentence, every idea he translated into something real. And slowly, painfully, his agency began to grow. It wasn't easy. He lost clients. Made mistakes. Once, a big project failed and he had to refund all the money. He sat in silence for an hour, staring at the empty balance in his account. The old version of him, the factory boy, would have broken down. But this Andrew? He smiled. Because failure was familiar. And he had learned to use it. He said quietly, "This is the price. This is the pain that builds the man." Months turned into years. His skills grew, his name spread. Small clients became big brands. And eventually, Forged Words became a team. 5 people. Then 10. Then 20. He moved into a small office. White walls, one old couch, and a single word on the door, built from pain. Every person he hired, he told the same thing. "I don't care where you came from. I care how hard you're willing to climb." They didn't see the old Andrew, the one who slept in a freezing dorm, who worked until his hands bled. But he carried that version of himself everywhere he went. Because the past wasn't a wound anymore. It was a weapon. Success didn't change him, it revealed him. He began giving talks online, sharing his story. Not to brag but to remind others what was possible. People from around the world listened. Factory workers, students, dreamers, those who thought life had already beaten them. One night, after a long day, he received a message from a young man. "Your story saved me. I was about to give up. Now I'm trying again." Andrew stared at the message for a long time. Then he closed his laptop, leaned back and exhaled. That was the first time in years he cried, not from pain but from peace. A year later he went back to the old factory. It had shut down. The walls were cracked, the gates rusted, the silence deafening. He walked through the empty halls, the same place that once tried to break him. He stopped in front of the machine he used to work at. His fingers brushed the cold metal. It was still there, the smell of oil, the echo of sweat and screams. He whispered, "You made me. You tried to destroy me, and you made me." For a long moment he just stood there, the man who had once been a boy in the cold. And in the silence he smiled. When he left the building, the sky was burning orange. The air was clean. He looked up and saw the same stars that once felt so far away. Now they looked close, almost within reach. He thought about everyone who laughed, everyone who doubted, everyone who said he'd never be more than a worker. He didn't hate them. He thanked them. Because without them he wouldn't have had the fire. Without them he would have stayed comfortable, small, safe. And comfort kills greatness. Now, years later, people ask him, "How did you do it? How did you go from the factory to freedom?" He always says the same thing. "I didn't escape the pain. I built from it." Because pain isn't something you run from. It's something you shape yourself through. It's the weight that makes you strong, if you don't let it crush you. He still wakes up early. Still works harder than most. Not because he has to, but because he remembers when he didn't have a choice. Every scar, every loss, every night he thought he'd break. It all became part of the foundation. He doesn't wish his life had been easier. He's grateful it was hard. Because the boy who was broken by life was the same man who learned how to build it. And now, when he looks in the mirror, he sees both versions of himself. The boy from the factory, and the man who turned pain into purpose. He smiles. Because he knows. You don't need luck. You don't need talent. You just need to endure long enough to become unrecognizable to your past self. That's what true power is. That's what being built from pain means.